All right, today we're diving into a literary cold case that's about 2,700 years old, the Book of Isaiah. Now, this isn't just any book. It's a masterpiece of world literature, a cornerstone for multiple faiths. But deep inside its pages lies one of the most fascinating literary puzzles in history. So what's the big mystery? Well, it all boils down to one question, but the answer is anything but simple. Was this massive, 66-chapter book written by a single prophet way back in the 8th century BC? Or is it actually a collection, the work of several different authors writing over a span of more than 150 years? And this slide right here, it really lays out the whole problem perfectly. The book practically splits in two. The first part, chapters 1 to 39, is set in the 8th century BC. The big bad guys are the Assyrians, and the whole vibe is pretty heavy, lots of judgment and rebuke. But then, bam, you hit chapter 40 and it's like you've walked into a completely different world. The setting leaps forward 150 years, the enemy is now Babylon, and the theme does a total 180 to comfort and hope. I mean, they're so different, you can totally see why people have been arguing for centuries about whether one person could have possibly written both.
So, here's how we're going to crack this case. We're going to look at the evidence for two authors, then we'll hear the rebuttal for a single voice. We'll also check out a more modern theory that tries to split the difference. And finally, we'll get into why this ancient argument still packs a punch today. Okay, let's start with the prosecution. This is the case from multiple authors, a view that's really championed by what's known as the literary critical school. And honestly, they've got some pretty powerful evidence on their side.
The prosecution's star witness, you could say, is the historical setting. This is probably the biggest, most compelling argument for having at least two authors. The world in the first half of the book is just fundamentally different from the world in the second half.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows you the massive time jump we're talking about. Isaiah of Jerusalem, the guy from the first half, was active in the 8th century BC. But all the events in the second half, Jerusalem's destruction, the exile in Babylon, the rise of this king named Cyrus the Persian, all of that happens about 150 years after Isaiah was gone. The writer of these later chapters sounds like an eyewitness, like someone speaking directly to the people who are actually living through this exile.
And as the scholar R.N. Wybray points out, this message of hope and comfort for people exiled in Babylon, well, it would have been totally meaningless to Isaiah's original audience. They were busy worrying about the Assyrians knocking at their door, not some Babylonian empire that hadn't even become a world power yet. All right, the next piece of evidence shifts from the historical context to the actual words on the page. The argument here is that it's not just the setting that's different, the writing itself feels like it came from a totally different person.
Scholars like S.R. Driver have pointed out some major differences in vocabulary and style. You know, think about a writer's little quirks, the specific words they like to use, their turns of phrase. Well, these scholars found that certain expressions are all over the second half of the book, but are nowhere to be found in the first. For them, that's a clear linguistic fingerprint that points to a different author writing in a different time.
But hold on, this case is far from closed. Let's pivot and hear from the defense. We're going to look at the arguments for a single author and see how they respond to all this.
So the defense kicks things off by questioning the whole style argument. They ask, is it really a different style or is it just a different subject? I mean, it makes sense, right? A prophet yelling about impending doom is going to sound a lot different than a prophet offering words of comfort and hope.
And this is where the defense presents its own smoking gun. A scholar named Rachel Margalioff did this incredible deep dive and found hundreds of unique phrases and expressions, these linguistic fingerprints that show up in both parts of Isaiah but are super rare anywhere else in ancient literature. For instance, the title, The Holy One of Israel, is used constantly through all 66 chapters, almost like a signature. But she also found dozens of other quirky, shared phrases and really specific ways of telling people off. She argued that these shared linguistic oddities are like a single author's DNA, stamped across the entire work.
So what Margalioff's work does is pretty amazing. It basically flips that whole style argument on its head. It suggests that if you look closely at the unique language, the book is actually remarkably unified, not divided at all.
And the evidence for unity doesn't stop there. First off, you've got the physical evidence. The oldest copies we have, like the famous Dead Sea Scrolls from around the 2nd century BC, show Isaiah as one long continuous scroll. There aren't any ancient manuscripts out there where the book is split in two. Then you have later writers, like those in the New Testament. They constantly quote from both halves of the book, and every time they say it was written by the prophet Isaiah.
A great example is in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, where the author quotes a passage from the second part of Isaiah and then immediately quotes from the first part, back to back, and credits both to the same guy, Isaiah. So, we've got compelling evidence on both sides of the aisle. This kind of deadlock has led many modern scholars to a third way, a theory that tries to make sense of both the differences and the striking similarities. It's called reductional unity. The basic idea is that, okay, maybe different parts were written by different people at different times, but a final, brilliant editor came along and skillfully wove all of it together. This editor might have intentionally copied the style of the original Isaiah to create one seamless, powerful, and unified book.
A great way to think about it is like a master film editor. They might take footage shot by different camera crews at different times, but they edit it all together so perfectly that it becomes a single, cohesive, epic film. The final product is a unified whole, even if it didn't come from a single source.
Now, with all this conflicting evidence, you might be thinking, hey, this is the 21st century. Can't we just throw some modern technology at this, let a computer figure it out?
Well, funny you should ask. They did try. And the results? They just made the mystery even murkier. One big computer analysis concluded, yup, multiple authors. But then another study, using a different method, came back with the exact opposite conclusion. Nope, single author. And here's the kicker. The method that pointed to multiple authors in Isaiah, when they ran it on the book of Genesis, it proved it had a single author, a finding that many of the same scholars who liked the Isaiah result totally reject. It just goes to show you, even our most objective tools have a hard time with this ancient puzzle.
So after all this back and forth, you've got to wonder, why do we still care? Why are we still debating this after 2,700 years? Well, it turns out this whole argument is about something much, much deeper than literary style. This isn't just some dusty academic squabble. No, it actually gets to a really fundamental question about how we view the world itself. Because in the end, your conclusion about who wrote Isaiah often depends less on the evidence itself and more on what you assume is possible from the get-go. See, the whole debate really pivots on this one single concept, predictive prophecy. If your worldview says, sure, a prophet in the 8th century BC could be divinely told the name of a king, Cyrus the Persian, who wouldn't even be born for another 150 years, well, then single authorship makes perfect sense. But if you start from the belief that that kind of supernatural prediction is just not possible, then you have to conclude that those chapters were written much later, after Cyrus was already a famous king. The evidence gets filtered through that core belief.
And that leaves us right here with one last big question. The mystery of Isaiah's authorship isn't just about some ancient book. It's like a mirror. It forces us all to ask ourselves, how do our own deeply held beliefs, our own worldviews, shape the way we look at evidence and piece together the story of the past? It's a question that goes way beyond this 2,700-year-old case file. Thanks for tuning in.